चलिए आज एक बहुत ही कह सकते हैं क्रांतिकारी ब्लूप्रिंट को समझते हैं। इसका दावा है कि हमारा जो ग्लोबल ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम है ना, वो पूरी तरह से करप्ट हो चुका है और अब इसे जड़ से बदलने की मतलब एक तरह से रीराइट करने की जरूरत है। इसकी शुरुआत होती है एक बहुत ही चौंकाने वाली चेतावनी से कि इंसानियत का भविष्य बहुत ही अंधकार में नजर आ रहा है। मतलब ये एक ऐसी दुनिया की तस्वीर पेश करता है जो जैसे आग पर खड़ी हो। तो सवाल ये है कि हम यहाँ तक पहुँचे कैसे? चलिए सबसे पहले उस असल प्रॉब्लम को ही समझते हैं जिसे ये फ्रेमवर्क डायग्नोज करता है। हमारी आज की जो हालत है उसे मूर्खों का युद्ध या वॉर ऑफ इडियट्स कहा गया है। मतलब ये कोई इंटेलिजेंस की लड़ाई नहीं है, बल्कि तीन खतरनाक ताकतों का एक जहरीला कॉम्बिनेशन है जो इसे चला रहा है और जो सिर्फ अहंकार और मुनाफे को बढ़ावा देता है। अब सबसे दिलचस्प बात पता है क्या है? ये जो तीन ताकतें हैं, मसल पावर, मनी पावर और नैरेटिव पावर, ये एक दूसरे को ही सपोर्ट करती हैं, एक दूसरे को और बढ़ाती हैं। और इसी से बनता है एक ऐसा विनाशकारी चक्र जो बस चलता ही रहता है। और यहीं पर एक बहुत बड़ा दावा सामने आता है कि जो असली ताकत है वो चुने हुए नेताओं के पास है ही नहीं। वो तो बस कह सकते हैं ग्लोरिफाइड पपेट्स या चमकदार कठपुतलियां हैं। असली कंट्रोल तो बड़ी बड़ी कॉर्पोरेट लॉबी के हाथ में है। और ये देखिए, ये पावर स्ट्रक्चर को एकदम साफ साफ दिखाता है। ये एक तरह की फूड चेन है जिसमें सबसे ऊपर बिग फार्मा, फिर मिलिट्री लॉबी और फिर ऑयल एंड गैस लॉबी। ये सब मिलकर जंग और मुनाफे का एक ऐसा सिस्टम बनाते हैं जो खुद ब खुद चलता रहता है। इसका स्केल कितना बड़ा है इसका अंदाजा इस नंबर से लगाइए, 160 करोड़। ये सिर्फ एक पेन किलर टैबलेट की बिक्री का आंकड़ा है, वो भी सिर्फ भारत में और सिर्फ महामारी के 1 साल के दौरान। मतलब आप सोच सकते हैं कि फाइनेंशियल स्टेक्स कितने ज्यादा हैं। तो अहम बात यह है कि जब ये सब कुछ चल रहा है तो जो एक नेचुरल काउंटर बैलेंस होना चाहिए था, मतलब हमारे साइंटिस्ट, एकेडेमिक्स, थिंकर्स, वो लोग या तो डर की वजह से या आपसी फूट के कारण या फिर अपने कंफर्ट जोन में पूरी तरह से चुप हैं। तो प्रॉब्लम तो साफ दिख रही है। अब बात करते हैं इसके इलाज की, जो कि एक टेक्नोलॉजिकल सॉल्यूशन है। यहाँ पर पुराने और नए सिस्टम का फर्क एकदम साफ है। पुराना सिस्टम क्लिक्स और परसुएजन पर चलता था, मतलब जिसकी आवाज़ सबसे बुलंद वो विजेता। लेकिन ये नया AI ट्रूथ इंजन सच्चाई और वेरिफिकेशन पर काम करेगा। यहाँ वही जीतेगा जिसकी क्वालिटी सबसे बेस्ट होगी, ना कि जिसकी आवाज़ सबसे तेज़। इस टेक्नोलॉजी को समझने का सबसे अच्छा तरीका है इसे एक ऑथेंटिकेटेड डिजिटल मिरर की तरह देखना। मतलब एक ऐसा डिजिटल आईना जो सर्टिफाइड हो। इसका काम किसी को कुछ बेचना या मनाना नहीं है। इसका सिर्फ एक काम है, किसी भी दावे, प्रोडक्ट या इंसान की वो सच्चाई दिखाना जो साबित की जा सके, एकदम खरी और सच्ची। ये पूरा विजन 5 पिलर्स पर टिका है। पहला, AI ट्रांसपेरेंसी प्लेटफॉर्म्स। दूसरा, मेरिट बेस्ड गवर्नेंस। तीसरा, सिटीजन डिजिटल पार्टिसिपेशन। चौथा, ट्रूथ डिटेक्शन टेक्नोलॉजी। और पांचवा, ग्लोबल एथिकल डायलॉग। ये सब मिलकर समाज को ट्रांसपेरेंसी और मेरिट के इर्द गिर्द फिर से बनाने के लिए डिजाइन किए गए हैं। लेकिन अगर टेक्नोलॉजी ही इसका जवाब है तो हमें एक बहुत बड़ी सच्चाई का सामना करना पड़ेगा। और वो सवाल ये है कि अगर एक ट्रूथ इंजन इतना ही परफेक्ट सॉल्यूशन है तो फिर ये अभी तक बना क्यों नहीं? इसे बनाने के 3 रास्ते सोचे गए हैं। पहला है टॉप डाउन, यानी सरकार बनाए, लेकिन वो तो इसका विरोध करेगी। दूसरा रास्ता है कि बुद्धिजीवी लोग मिलकर बनाएं, लेकिन वो आपस में ही बटे हुए हैं। और तीसरा है कि जनता एक मूवमेंट खड़ा करे, पर वहां डिजिटल लिटरेसी की कमी आड़े आ जाती है। मतलब हर रास्ते में बड़ी रुकावटें हैं। तो जाहिर है जो सिस्टम है वो खुद अपने ऊपर नजर रखने वाले ऑडिटर को तो पैसा देगा नहीं। इसीलिए ये फ्रेमवर्क इंस्टीट्यूशनल फंडिंग के बजाय एक कल्चरल सॉल्यूशन की बात करता है, लोगों की इच्छा शक्ति को जगाने की बात करता है। अच्छा, तो ये तो हो गई बड़ी बड़ी बातें। अब देखते हैं कि इन आइडियाज़ को असल दुनिया में प्रैक्टिकली कैसे लागू किया जा सकता है। एक छोटा सा लेकिन बहुत पावरफुल उदाहरण देखिए। पहले एक YouTube टाइटल था जो बस एक लाइब्रेरी कैटलॉग जैसा लगता था, एकदम सूखा। और बाद में उसे बदलकर एक ऐसा सवाल बनाया गया जो सीधे सीधे उत्सुकता जगाता है और अपनी एक्सपर्टीज भी साबित करता है। और ये टेबल तो कमाल का है। ये दिखाता है कि AI काम कैसे करेगा। चाहे जुडिशरी हो, फाइनेंस हो या HR, हर जगह AI एक असिस्टेंट का रोल निभाएगा। वो केस समराइज करेगा, फ्रॉड पैटर्न पकड़ेगा, परफॉर्मेंस डेटा एनालाइज करेगा। लेकिन अथॉरिटी यानी फाइनल फैसला लेने का हक हमेशा इंसान का ही होगा।
और कंट्रोल बना रहे, इसके लिए एक रिस्क बेस्ड मॉडल अपनाया जाएगा। जहां रिस्क ज्यादा है, जैसे न्याय के मामलों में, वहां एआई सिर्फ एक सलाहकार होगा। जहां रिस्क मीडियम है, जैसे एचआर में, वहां वो सिफारिशें देगा। और जहां रिस्क कम है, वहां ऑटोमेशन का इस्तेमाल किया जा सकता है, लेकिन निगरानी के साथ।
ये सब हमें एक आखिरी और शायद सबसे अहम सवाल की तरफ ले जाता है। जरा एक ऐसी दुनिया की कल्पना कीजिए जो पूरी तरह से बिना किसी फिल्टर के गणितीय रूप से सिद्ध की गई सच्चाई पर बनी हो। तो सवाल ये है कि अगर कल सुबह एक परफेक्ट ट्रूथ इंजन लाइव हो जाए, तो क्या हम इंसानियत के तौर पे उस सच्चाई को सुनने के लिए सच में तैयार हैं?
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are examining a deeply provocative framework that attempts to diagnose and really cure what the authors refer to as the compounding geopolitical and systemic crises of our time.
Right, and it's a condition the authors bluntly dubbed the War of Idiots.
War of idiots. Exactly. It's a striking term.
It is, yeah. And it perfectly sets up the central tension we're exploring today. I mean, we are looking at a world on the brink and asking how we actually pull it back. Like, do we rely on an objective, algorithmic truth technology to independently dismantle systemic corruption?
Right.
Or does the deployment of any such technological system inherently require, a prerequisite cultural awakening, like a spiritual transformation rooted in ancient wisdom?
Yeah, exactly. And this debate really emerges from a fascinating collection of recent manifestos, cinematic scripts, and academic symposiums. They essentially present two very different cures for global conflict.
Two entirely different paradigms, really.
Exactly. On one side, there's an artificial intelligence framework known as AI.3rd.EYE, and on the other, a profound cultural call to action deeply rooted in Indic wisdom. So I'll be arguing that the root of our compounding crises is fundamentally structural, and because of that, the solution has to be an incorruptible, mathematically objective transparency network that systematically strips power from the corporate lobbies currently controlling the globe.
Well, and I'll argue that technological solutions are ultimately futile without addressing human ego and what the material calls intellectual silence. I believe we require a foundational shift toward Indic wisdom and cultural responsibility before any algorithm can actually save us.
So let's get right into the mechanics of this, because from my perspective, we really have to look at global conflict objectively.
Okay.
The material posits that the world is currently controlled by corporate puppet masters. Specifically, this is a triad. It's the military, the oil, and the big pharma lobbies.
The big three.
The big three, yeah. And the mechanism they use to control the globe is incredibly efficient, operating in three distinct phases. First, they utilize narrative power, which is essentially weaponized propaganda to manufacture consent or fear.
Right, the stories we tell ourselves.
Exactly. And then that narrative is used to trigger muscle power, which is the actual deployment of military forces or state coercion. And finally, that deployment of muscle secures money power for the lobbies.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is. And the intellectuals of the world have completely failed to counter this cycle, mostly due to fear or comfort or just ideological division. So, because human beings have proven entirely incapable of breaking this loop, the only viable solution is technological. AI.3rd.EYE.
And this is the digital lie detector, right?
Exactly. It's proposed as a global, real-time digital lie detector. By objectively verifying geopolitical claims and mathematically tracking the invisible strings of money, this AI serves as an incorruptible auditor. It's designed to replace the visibility trap of modern media where, the loudest, most well-funded voice wins with absolute, verifiable truth.
Well, look, that technological optimism is appealing on paper, but it entirely ignores the realities of human nature. Think about it practically. A corrupt system will never willingly fund, build, or deploy its own auditor.
That's a fair point, but...
The core problem driving this war of idiots isn't a lack of data, and it isn't a lack of verifiable facts. The problem is the intellectual silence of our greatest thinkers and the unchecked ego of our global leaders.
So you think the technology is fundamentally treating a symptom rather than the disease?
Precisely, yeah. Before an AI transparency network can be deployed, let alone trusted, there has to be a cultural and spiritual awakening. We have to draw upon Indic wisdom to address the profound inner void of modern society.
Right.
Because for too long, Western frameworks have only asked what we are doing or, how we are optimizing it. Indic wisdom forces us to ask who we are being while we do it.
Who we are being.
Yes. The material makes a very compelling case that only a culturally motivated citizenry spurred by art, philosophy, and a deep sense of personal responsibility can act as the true immune system for the world. Technology is just a tool. Wisdom is the operator.
Okay, but to understand why a technological auditor is necessary, though, we have to look at the sheer scale of the manipulation we're dealing with. The scale of corporate manipulation has completely surpassed human analytical capacity.
Has it, though?
I mean, absolutely. Look at a staggering statistic from the source material. It claims that in just 1 year of the pandemic, $1.6 trillion painkiller pills were sold in India alone.
Wait, I have to jump in there because mathematically, that implies over 1,000 pills per citizen, including infants, in a single year. It's an astronomical number.
It is, yeah. And whether the author is using hyperbole to make a rhetorical point or literally counting every single microscopic tablet floating through unregulated bulk supply chains, the underlying mechanism it points to is undeniably real.
Right.
It perfectly illustrates the self-sustaining profit cycle of big pharma profiting from systemic distress. The triad's operations are so vast that the author suggests these corporate actors make historical dictators look like saints in comparison.
Wow.
Yeah. Human journalists and fractured academic institutions simply cannot track this level of global exploitation anymore.
But you think an algorithm can?
Absolutely. An AI transparency network could expose these exact anomalies instantly. I mean, the material uses a hypothetical 2026 Iran war scenario as a stress test for this exact function.
The missile strike scenario.
Right. It details a situation where U.S. and Israeli strikes prompt Iranian retaliation with missiles and drones, disrupting Gulf security and oil supplies. In our current world, that's just a tragic geopolitical event wrapped in conflicting media narratives. But in a world with AI.3rd.EYE, the system cross-references the political claims justifying the war against global satellite data.
Real-time tracking.
Exactly. Real-time spikes in arms manufacturing stocks. It maps the financial incentive behind the missile strike before the dust even settles. It exposes the money power immediately.
Well, I come at it from a different way. You're suggesting that if we just show people the data, the conflict stops. Like exposure equals resolution.
Broadly, yes.
Let's look at the historical parallel the source material provides, which is the year 1914. World War I wasn't caused by a lack of educated diplomats. It wasn't caused by a lack of data or misunderstanding of troop movements or invisible financial strings.
Right, but
It was caused by unchecked human ego, nationalistic pride, and a complete collapse of rational foresight. We had all the information necessary to know it would be an absolute bloodbath, and the leaders sleepwalked into it anyway.
But the speed of information was drastically different.
The speed of human ego hasn't changed. If you switch on a radical transparency AI tomorrow, an ego-driven humanity won't suddenly become enlightened. The military and political leaders whose power is threatened will simply go to war with the AI itself. They'll label it a threat to national security or a foreign psychological operation. You know, data does not cure ego.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. The AI doesn't just present data. It fundamentally shifts the entire digital ecosystem away from sentiment and toward pure facts.
Okay.
Right now, our digital infrastructure asks one question. Do people like this? It measures emotion, which is exactly why the propaganda virus spreads so quickly. Outrage gets clicks. AI.3rd.EYE, on the other hand, asks, is this true?
And how exactly does a machine determine the objective truth of a complex geopolitical conflict?
Well, the material outlines tools they call eJudge and ENFR. Think of eJudge like an automated mathematical courtroom. Instead of relying on pundits arguing over opinions, it takes a political claim, scans global financial data, historical records, and satellite imagery in milliseconds, and then it issues a factual verdict on who is materially profiting from that claim.
And ENFR?
ENFR acts as a fact router that strips the emotional language out of the narrative. Together, they neutralize the propaganda virus before it infects the public ego. You can't have unchecked ego driving a war if the underlying financial grift is instantly exposed and mathematically proven to every smartphone on the planet.
Okay, but how does that system actually get implemented? Because the material explicitly acknowledges an implementation paradox. You basically have 3 paths to get this AI into the world.
Right.
Path 1 is a top-down network installed by governments. But governments will violently resist this because, let's be real, no politician wants a mathematically objective auditor checking their math.
True.
Path 2 is a global intellectual alliance. But academics are too ideologically fractured to agree on a unified truth.
Which leaves path 3.
Right, path 3, a grassroots citizen AI movement. But everyday citizens suffer from massive digital illiteracy. You're asking an exhausted, economically strained global population to suddenly become real-time data analysts championing a complex algorithm.
Well,
Cold, hard data does not inspire revolutions. Art does. This is exactly why the source material relies on a deeply cultural wrapper.
You're referring to the cinematic campaign.
Yes, the cinematic campaign featuring the song Carlo Cucciam, which loosely translates to a demand to do some work or take action. It relies on a commanding Amitabh Bachchan-style voiceover to wake people up emotionally.
right.
You need that visceral, artistic cultural wrapper to motivate the public. You have to get them to stop complaining about the system and actually demand the transparency you're talking about. The culture has to shift before the technology can land.
It's like humanity has built a state-of-the-art high-speed train using quantum science and artificial intelligence. It's an absolute marvel of engineering, but instead of letting the automated safety systems do their job, you're arguing we need to sing a song in the passenger cars to hit the brakes.
I wouldn't quite put it like that.
I mean, a Bollywood-style anthem, no matter how emotionally resonant or culturally significant, cannot genuinely dismantle the entrenched power of the global arms and oil lobbies.
It gives the people the courage to demand the dismantling.
But what actually dismantles them is structural governance reform, not just courage. The source material details an incredibly robust framework for this, called the AI-assisted officers model. It structurally mandates accountability through 3 pillars. First, universal digital traceability. This creates a permanent, immutable record of decisions, kind of like a public ledger.
Okay.
Second, an AI analytical layer that flags risks and anomalies in those decisions. And third, human authority.
So the human is still in charge.
Yes, the AI doesn't bypass the human, it acts as an advisor. But here is the critical structural shift. If the human officer goes against the AI's data-driven recommendation, whether they are operating in the judiciary, financial governance, or human resources, they are forced to document exactly why. They have to put their name next to the deviation. That structurally enforces merit-based governance. You don't need a song to enforce accountability if the architecture of the system demands it.
Well, that's a compelling architectural argument, but have you considered who is actually sitting in those governance chairs? Let's transition away from the macro-level structures and look at the corporate and individual level, because that's where these deviations and decisions actually happen.
Okay, sure.
The source material points out that Gen Z has essentially reached the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Their basic material and security needs are largely met, yet they are left with a profound inner void. Western management models are completely failing them.
How so?
Well, look at the frameworks we use. We talk about the 17 sustainability goals, which the material rightly points out are inherently paradoxical because they are still rooted in the assumption of endless economic growth on a finite planet.
Right.
We import concepts like ikigai to find purpose in the boardroom, completely ignoring that these holistic concepts already exist in our grandmother's wisdom, stripped of their corporate packaging. To truly reform the corporate world, we must use Indic wisdom to address the who. Who are you being in this moment?
And how does that translate into actionable corporate governance?
The material cites JBP Sinha's Nurture and Task Leader model. It points to the Aravind Eye Care system as proof. Aravind Eye Care performs millions of surgeries for free or an ultra-low cost, cross-subsidizing them with paying patients, and yet they maintain world-class quality.
That is impressive.
Yeah, and they don't do this because an AI told them it was optimal. They do it by integrating spiritual awareness, specifically the witnessing attitude, or Sakshi Bhava.
For those less familiar with the term, how does Sakshi Bhava operate in a business setting?
Think of Sakshi Bhava as the ability to mentally step back and observe your own actions, ego, and desires in real time, without being consumed by them. It's a profound sense of detachment from selfish outcomes.
Okay.
In a boardroom, that means a leader isn't just asking how much profit did we extract, but witnessing their own intent. They're operating from a space of nurturing and ethical duty to the broader community. You need leaders who operate from that grounded space, not leaders who only act ethically because they are terrified of an AI auditor flagging their ledger.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. I completely acknowledge the value of ancient storytelling like the Mahabharata or the Arthashastra to contextualize leadership and give meaning to the individual.
Right.
But in the modern corporate sphere, the scale of deception requires a systemic counterweight. Relying on individual CEOs to achieve Sakshi Bhava is a beautiful ideal, but it's not a reliable global strategy. This brings us to the concept of truth-based digital marketing governed by AI.
Which sounds like an oxymoron?
It does, yeah. But it's actually the ultimate equalizer. Right now, corporate excellence is often just an illusion created by the visibility trap. Whoever has the biggest advertising budget buys the most visibility, and that visibility becomes accepted as truth.
True.
Truth technology mathematically proves track records. It takes the marketing fluff, the PR claims of being revolutionary or eco-friendly, and objectively degrades it to its factual baseline. By mapping the actual financial and material impact of a company, AI ends the era where the loudest voice wins. It forces corporations to adopt true excellence rather than just manufacturing hype. If a company wants to succeed under AI.3rd.EYE, they have to actually be excellent, because the AI will expose them if they are just pretending.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You cannot simply replace human accountability and spiritual grounding with a machine, no matter how sophisticated the math is. If the human operating system is still running on greed, if that inner void in our leaders hasn't been filled by the cultural and spiritual awakening I'm talking about, they will inevitably weaponize the very transparency tools you're praising.
You think they'll hack the AI?
I think they'll game it. They'll use deep fakes, algorithmic manipulation, and sophisticated data noise to confuse your e-judge and ENFR systems. An algorithm is only as good as the intent of the society that wields it.
Well,
If we don't break our intellectual silence, if we don't embrace the non-invasive, inclusive nature of Indic wisdom to fundamentally change the psychology of our leaders, your AI lie detector will either be ignored, corrupted, or simply destroyed by the people in power. You can't patch a corrupt soul with code.
okay. I think it's time we summarize our positions in light of this exchange. My stance remains that while human wisdom, art, and cultural grounding are undeniably valuable for the individual, they simply cannot scale to meet the sheer speed and complexity of the modern war of idiots.
Right.
The corporate puppet masters operate globally, moving billions of dollars and manufacturing geopolitical consent in milliseconds. To counter that mechanical efficiency, we absolutely require a digital immune system, a mathematical truth engine like AI.3rd.EYE. By structurally enforcing global transparency, mandating AI-assisted accountability, and replacing the visibility trap with verified impact, we can systematically strip power away from the lobbies that profit from human suffering.
And my position is that technology, no matter how mathematically perfect or structurally sound, is merely a tool. A digital immune system is completely useless if the societal body it protects lacks the will to live ethically. Without the moral courage to break our intellectual silence, and without the deep cultural grounding provided by ancient Indic wisdom to cure the inner void of our leaders, an AI auditor is doomed to fail. The true solution isn't found in a server farm. It lies in personal responsibility, active citizenship, and a profound shift in how we view our interconnected role in the universe.
Well, despite our different approaches to the cure, it's clear we share a profound point of convergence. The current global operating system is corrupted. It's driven by muscle, money, and narrative power, and it requires a fundamental rewrite. The status quo is simply untenable.
We absolutely agree on that. The diagnosis of the disease is identical. Our divergence is entirely on the nature of the medicine.
Which brings us back to the chilling question left by the source material, a question that lingers precisely where the rails end. If we were to somehow bypass the implementation paradox, flip the switch tomorrow, and turn on a truly incorruptible AI that floods the world with absolute, unfiltered transparency,
Is humanity actually brave enough to handle it? Or would we just panic, reject the truth, and start an entirely new kind of war against the machine that finally showed us who we really are?
it forces us to ask whether we're ready to look objectively at the world we've built, or if we're too terrified to see the invisible strings illuminated in front of us. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.